In just the past few days, Russia has confirmed losses of over 11,300 tanks and 23,500 armored vehicles in the brutal Ukraine war. Numbers that keep climbing as the conflict drags on into its fourth year. A tiny frontline village in Zaporizhzhia, barely a dot on the map, changes hands twice in just 48 hours. It turns into a fiery battlefield where old-school heavy armor clashes head-on with cheap, deadly drones in a game-changing showdown. Russian forces rolled in hard, splitting their tanks, BMPs, infantry, and artillery into multiple attack waves to overwhelm Ukrainian defenses with non-stop shelling and pressure from every direction. It seemed like a classic victory at first. Tanks blasting fortifications, armored vehicles pushing forward under cover, forcing Ukrainian troops to pull back or risk total wipeout. But then, Ukraine flipped the situation with a surprise counterattack. Sleek, nimble teams blending M113 carriers, BMPs, and swarms of FPV drones that hunt like predators. Together, they dodged mines and striked with pinpoint precision. This isn't just another skirmish. It's exposing massive cracks in Russia's traditional blitz tactics, where sheer numbers and firepower once ruled. Now, Ukraine's innovative drone tech, flying up to 1,600 kilometers with explosive payloads, is shredding that dominance, slowing Russian advances and buying precious time. So, what's next? Is the mighty tank era crumbling for good? Or can Russia adapt before it's too late? Stick around as we break down how this village battle could rewrite modern warfare rules. Russian forces launched a multi-directional assault on the frontline village, deploying tanks, armored personnel carriers, infantry units to build constant pressure from various angles, and this move aimed to overwhelm Ukrainian defenses quickly. Tanks took positions at a distance, firing heavy shells into fortified spots, while armored vehicles carried soldiers closer to the edge of the settlement, and the split groups allowed them to distract the enemy effectively. Infantry advanced under this cover, pushing forward step by step as explosions rocked the area. And the non-stop barrage left no room for Ukrainian troops to regroup or counter. One group of armored carriers moved in from the south, dodging rough terrain, but hit a landmine that damaged the lead vehicle, yet failed to stop the push entirely. Meanwhile, another column approached from the north, facing scattered resistance, and tanks kept up the fire to pin down any remaining defenders in trenches or buildings. The artillery support reached a critical level, combining rocket launchers and howitzers to rain down destruction. And this forced Ukrainian soldiers to pull back temporarily to prevent a complete collapse of their lines. Shells tore through concrete barriers and earthworks, creating clouds of dust that obscured visibility. And the intensity grew as Russian commanders coordinated strikes to target key strongholds. Ukrainian positions crumbled under the weight of this firepower, with some bunkers collapsing entirely. And troops gathered their injured comrades before retreating to safer ground nearby. A few armored units tried to hold the line longer, firing back with machine guns, but the overwhelming volume of incoming rounds made staying impossible. As the defenders withdrew, Russian drones circled overhead to track movements. One evacuation vehicle with an explosive payload. And this narrow escape highlighted the chaos of the moment. Once in control of the village, Russian troops aimed to turn it into a launch point for broader offensives across the western plains, fortifying ruined houses and unloading supplies to secure their gain. Soldiers raised flags over rooftops as a sign of victory, setting up machine gun nests in basements and along streets, and they began clearing debris to create better firing lanes. Ammunition crates piled up near key buildings, allowing quick resupply for ongoing patrols, and drone operators scanned the horizon for any signs of countermoves. The location offered a view over open fields, ideal for spotting approaching threats. and commanders plan to use it as a hub to link with nearby advances. Infantry groups spread out among the wreckage, digging shallow trenches for protection, and tanks repositioned to guard the flanks against possible flanks. However, the rapid capture without strengthening reconnaissance and communication networks exposed tactical gaps that opponents could exploit, leaving the new positions vulnerable to surprise actions. Spotters failed to cover all entry points adequately, creating blind spots in the perimeter, and radio links suffered from jamming signals that disrupted orders. Some units rushed to celebrate the win too soon, unloading gear without full sweeps for hidden dangers. And this haste meant overlooked areas where enemies might regroup. Drones provided some oversight, but battery limits and weather reduced their effectiveness at times, and the lack of layered defenses allowed for potential infiltration. Russian leaders focused on consolidating the hold, yet the incomplete setup invited risks, and soldiers remained on high alert amid the ruins. The village, now under their flag, stood as a temporary prize, but the flaws in preparation set the stage for what came next in this intense fight. Ukrainian forces chose to pull back from the village center under heavy enemy fire, and they repositioned rocket launchers along with scout drones to watch Russian movements closely. Troops moved out in small teams, carrying wounded soldiers on stretchers through back alleys, and they avoided main roads to dodge incoming shells that lit up the sky. Commanders signaled the retreat over secure channels, pulling units to higher ground nearby, and this allowed them to regroup without losing cohesion amid the chaos. Artillery spotters noted Russian positions during the withdrawal, marking tank locations for future strikes, and infantry covered the exit with suppressive bursts from rifles. One squad held a rear guard at a ruined wall, firing grenades to slow pursuers, and the rest slipped away into tree lines that offered temporary cover. Drones hovered low to relay live feeds back to headquarters, capturing images of enemy infantry spreading through the streets, and this data helped plan the next steps without alerting the opponents. Losses on the Russian side have mounted steadily since early 2024, with around 1,865 tanks destroyed and over 3,098 infantry fighting vehicles taken out in this theater of operations. Commanders track these hits through battlefield reports, noting how each loss reduces enemy mobility, and the pattern reveals a shift toward more defensive postures for the attackers. Drone footage often confirms the wrecks, scattered across fields like silent warnings, and this ongoing attrition forces replacements that strain supply lines. Soldiers on both sides feel the impact, as fewer vehicles mean harder advances, and the numbers underline the cost of holding ground in contested zones. The pullback served as a smart move rather than a sign of defeat, forming part of a strategy to stretch out the fight and drain opponent firepower while setting up a sudden pushback. Ukrainian leaders ordered the maneuver to lure Russian units deeper into exposed areas, buying time to resupply ammunition stocks. And this approach turned potential routes into calculated pauses. Troops dug in at new lines, fortifying with sandbags and wire barriers, and they conserved energy for the coming clash by rotating shifts under minimal light. Intelligence teams analyzed captured signals during the lull, spotting weaknesses in enemy formations, and this preparation ensured every soldier knew their role in the reversal. The tactic echoed broader doctrines of flexible defense, where retreating draws foes into kill zones, and it kept morale high among the ranks despite the temporary loss of territory. At the same time, Ukrainian drone squads launched quiet operations to gear up for a multi-layered counterstrike, positioning unmanned aircraft for surveillance and targeted hits without drawing attention. Operators calibrated cameras in hidden spots, feeding real-time views to mobile command posts, and these devices circled at safe altitudes to map out Russian patrols. Teams tested flight paths over neutral ground, adjusting for wind and battery life, and they loaded payloads ready for deployment against armored threats. Scouts integrated data from multiple sources, creating detailed overlays of the battlefield, and this silent buildup allowed for coordinated plans across units. Infantry received updates via tablets, aligning their movements with aerial support, and the effort focused on striking from unexpected angles to maximize surprise. As night fell, the drones hummed softly in the distance, signaling the shift from defense to offense, and this phase marked a turning point in the engagement's flow. Several days later, Ukrainian troops launched a sudden counterattack, sending M113 carriers and BMP vehicles loaded with infantry rushing into the village under thick smoke from supporting artillery and guided by drones that lit the way ahead. Armored units sped through open fields, weaving around craters from earlier blasts, and soldiers inside braced for impact as machine guns opened up on Russian positions in tree lines. The smokescreen hid their advance, allowing the lead vehicles to close in without drawing heavy return fire, and infantry prepared to jump out at the drop points. 1M113 pushed forward aggressively, its turrets swiveling to suppress enemies hiding behind walls, and the column followed closely to maintain momentum. Drones flew low to spot threats in real time, relaying coordinates back to gunners who adjusted their aim instantly. And this coordination kept the push rolling despite scattered explosions nearby. Russian defenders scrambled to react, firing wildly from windows, but the surprise element caught them off guard, forcing many to abandon forward spots and seek cover deeper inside buildings. Russian casualties mounted as unmanned craft exploited gaps in their defenses, striking supply trucks or exposed groups, and the system's impact rippled through the battle by weakening their hold. Troops on the ground felt the pressure, as fewer comrades arrived to help, and this erosion of strength tilted the odds further toward the attackers. The engagement stood out as a clear demonstration of the short kill chain concept, where fast scouting, swift decisions, and rapid strikes replace old ideas of overwhelming with sheer volume, shifting the dynamics of modern combat. Ukrainian commanders gathered intel from overhead views in seconds, issuing orders that sent forces into action without delay. And this loop cut down reaction times to mere minutes. Drones identified Russian hideouts quickly, feeding data straight to artillery crews who fired accurate volleys, and infantry then moved in to capitalize on the confusion. Russian tactics relied on massed barrages to dominate, but the quick cycle exposed their slowness, allowing opponents to dodge and hit back effectively. Soldiers adapted on the fly, adjusting paths based on fresh updates, and this agility turned defensive setups into vulnerable targets. The process highlighted how technology shortens the path from detection to destruction, making bulky assaults less viable, and the village became a live case of this evolution in warfare strategy. Unmanned aircraft led the way by marking safe routes and enemy clusters, while guns zeroed in on those spots with pinpoint shells, and foot soldiers followed up to clear the remnants. This synergy allowed small teams to outmaneuver larger groups, darting between ruins under protective fire, and the result forced defenders to split their attention. Artillery adjusted based on drone feeds, pounding strongpoints just before troops arrived, and infantry used the openings to flank positions without heavy losses. Russian responses faltered against this integrated approach, as their isolated units faced coordinated pressure from air and ground, and the advantage grew with each cleared block. The combination proved deadly in urban settings, where quick adaptations turned narrow streets into traps, and Ukrainian morale soared from seeing the plan unfold successfully. Close quarters fighting erupted across every house and basement within the village, as Ukrainian infantry pushed forward meter by meter and cleared resistance pockets with rocket-propelled grenades plus hand explosives. Soldiers split into small squads, moving through narrow lanes filled with rubble, and they tossed charges into doorways to flush out hidden enemies before charging inside. One team approached a damaged structure, spotting movement through cracked walls, and they launched a projectile that blasted the entrance open for a quick entry. Gunfire echoed from multiple rooms, forcing troops to hug corners for cover, and they coordinated shouts to signal clears after neutralizing threats. Basements turned into deadly traps, where defenders set ambushes with machine guns, but attackers used smoke devices to obscure vision and gain the upper hand. The advance relied on close teamwork, with medics trailing behind to treat minor wounds on the spot, and each captured building provided a brief foothold to press further. Russian holdouts fought fiercely from upper floors, raining bullets down stairwells, but Ukrainian persistence wore them down room by room. When Russian commanders attempted to rush reinforcements via motorcycles to evade aerial threats, Ukrainian FPV drones detected the group during transit and wiped out the entire relief force. Riders sped across open terrain, relying on speed over rough paths to reach the settlement fast. But operators tracked their dust trails from above and locked on target swiftly. One unmanned craft dove toward the lead bike, detonating its payload mid-motion and scattering debris across the field. The remaining vehicles swerved to avoid the wreckage, only to face follow-up strikes that ignited fuel tanks in bright flashes, and survivors abandoned their rides to flee on foot. Drone pilots adjusted angles in real time, pursuing stragglers who sought ditches for shelter, and the chase ended with precise hits that eliminated any chance of aid arriving. Russian efforts to bolster lines crumbled under this aerial dominance, turning a potential rescue into a total rout. Drones shifted beyond mere scouting roles and emerged as essential tools for urban clashes, integrating seamlessly into ground operations to deliver strikes amid tight spaces. Pilots maneuvered the devices through windows or alleys, targeting clusters of troops hunkered in attics. And these actions disrupted enemy coordination by forcing constant evasion. One unit guided a craft into a fortified garage, exploding near ammunition stacks to trigger secondary blasts that weakened structures. Infantry benefited from this support, advancing behind the distractions to overwhelm isolated positions, and the synergy turned chaotic streets into controlled zones. Operators switched between observation and attack modes effortlessly, spotting sniper nests from unusual vantage points, and their contributions extended fights by preventing regrouping. Russian countermeasures struggled against the versatility, as jamming attempts failed to block all signals, and the unmanned presence kept pressure steady throughout the skirmish. This evolution made every corner a potential strike zone, altering how soldiers navigated built-up environments. This development reveals a major shift in contemporary conflicts, where affordable options yield massive effects and tip the scales on contested grounds. Urban battles now favor precision over brute strength, as cheap payloads dismantle defenses that once required massive resources to breach. Commanders rethink deployments, incorporating these assets into core plans, and the change empowers underdogs to sustain prolonged engagements. Russian strategies face obsolescence against such innovations, pushing them toward hybrid responses that blend old methods with new tech. The village standoff underscores this transformation, proving that cost-effective tools can redefine victory conditions in drawn-out struggles. As Russian positions started to crumble under pressure, their commanders fired back with multiple salvos from Grad rocket systems that blanketed the entire zone without regard for friend or foe. Launchers positioned on distant hills unleashed barrages of projectiles, creating a storm of detonations that shook the ground and filled the air with shrapnel. Crews loaded tubes rapidly, aiming broadly at suspected enemy clusters, and the rockets streaked overhead in fiery arcs before impacting amid buildings. Explosions ripped through streets, uprooting trees and collapsing roofs, and the indiscriminate nature meant hits landed close to their own troops holding out in pockets. Ukrainian advances paused briefly amid the noise, but Russian gunners continued the volleys to disrupt the momentum, reloading under cover to sustain the assault. The systems proved unreliable in pinpointing threats, scattering payloads over wide swaths that turned the village into a hazard for everyone involved. Soldiers ducked behind whatever shelter remained as fragments whistled past, and the tactic aimed to buy time for regrouping despite the risks it posed. The aftermath saw numerous Russian fighters killed right in friendly territory, yet Ukrainian units dodged major harm through adaptable maneuvers that kept them one step ahead. Shell fragments struck defenders still clinging to basements, causing instant fatalities among those unable to relocate fast enough, and the chaos forced survivors to abandon gear in hasty retreats. Ukrainian squads anticipated the strikes by spreading out thinly, shifting locations after each wave, and this flexibility minimized exposure to the random blasts. Medics treated light injuries on the move, pulling comrades from debris without halting the push. And the contrast highlighted how rigid holds led to self-inflicted losses. Ukrainian commanders exploited the confusion, directing teams to press forward during lulls, and their evasion tactics turned the barrage into an opportunity rather than a setback. In the final 12 hours, Ukrainian forces reclaimed the whole settlement and raised their national banner once again as a powerful symbol of resilience. Troops conducted methodical sweeps through remaining structures, throwing charges into suspicious spots to eliminate holdouts, and they secured block after block with covering fire from elevated positions. One group cleared a collapsed underground space, ensuring no threats lingered amid the ruins, and the operation wrapped up with patrols confirming control over key intersections. Soldiers planted the flag atop a central rooftop, cheering briefly amid the smoke, and this act boosted spirits across the line as news traveled back to rear bases. Russian remnants either fell in the fighting or slipped away under darkness, leaving behind wrecked equipment, and Ukrainian reinforcements arrived to fortify the gains quickly. The recapture came swiftly after the artillery faded, allowing infantry to consolidate without opposition, and the village stood quiet at last under new guardianship. This turnaround marked the end of the intense cycle, shifting the front line back in favor of the defenders. This clash clearly shows how conventional assault doctrines relying on sheer bulk and heavy gunnery face serious challenges from evolving methods that prioritize speed and accuracy. Russian approaches centered on overwhelming saturation proved counterproductive, as broad strikes failed to halt nimble opponents who adapted seamlessly. Ukrainian success stemmed from blending tools like unmanned scouts with ground agility, outpacing strategies built around massed resources. The outcome prompts questions about future adjustments, as reliance on traditional might encounters limits against clever countermeasures. A single village may seem small on the map, but its battle told the story of a war that's changing before our eyes. What unfolded in those 48 hours wasn't just a local clash. It was the collapse of old warfare logic. Ukraine's counterattack proved that agility, coordination, and technology can now outmatch tanks and massed artillery, rewriting what power means on the battlefield. FPV drones, live data links, and fast reaction teams have become the new weapons of dominance, while heavy armor struggles to survive in a sky full of eyes. The lesson is brutal, but clear. Whoever controls the network, not the number of guns, will shape tomorrow's victories. For Moscow and even Western armies watching closely, one question looms. Can they adapt fast enough to this new generation of warfare, or will they keep losing soldiers and machines to outdated doctrines? Because if this tiny village is a preview, the next great war won't be won by steel and firepower. It will be won by code, signal, and timing. Stay with Military Force for clear analysis, real numbers, and field-level updates. Like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next turning point on the modern battlefield.